The chandeliers of the Palazzo Nero glittered like captured stars, their light cascading across a ballroom filled with the most dangerous men in Europe, politicians whose smiles concealed decades of corruption, billionaires whose fortunes were built on blood and silence. And seated among them, or rather waiting to be seated, the most feared mafia leaders the continent had ever known. At exactly 8 o'clock, the grand doors swept open. Alessandro Valenti entered like a king surveying his domain. But tonight something was wrong. His wife was missing. In her place walked a younger woman, blonde, stunning, draped in emerald silk that caught every eye in the room. Whispers erupted like wildfire. She's been replaced. After 12 years. He finally did it. Alessandro ignored them all. His steel-gray eyes swept the room with cold indifference as he guided his companion toward the head table, the table where only the most powerful sat. He pulled out a chair. He waited. And then, the first Don remained standing. Then another. And another. Within 60 seconds, not a single mafia leader had taken his seat. The ballroom fell into suffocating silence. An elderly Sicilian Don, his white hair swept back from a weathered face marked by 70 years of war and wisdom, finally spoke. His voice echoed through the marble halls like a death sentence. "Where is your wife?" For the first time that evening, Alessandro Valenti realized he had made a catastrophic mistake. Before we begin, thank you for spending part of your day with me. Whether you're listening from home, at work, on a long drive, or before bed, I'm truly grateful you're here. Tonight's story is filled with betrayal, power, heartbreak, and a woman everyone underestimated. Please like, share, and subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from so I can see just how far across the world this story has reached. Now, let's begin today's unforgettable story. 48 hours earlier, the Valenti estate sat shrouded in the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Isabella Valenti stood before the mirror in her dressing room, her hazel eyes tracing the elegant lines of the burgundy gown she'd chosen for the black rose gala. The dress was perfection, hand-stitched Venetian lace cascading from a structured bodice, the color deep enough to complement the red roses that would fill the palazzo's centerpieces. She had spent weeks preparing for this event, coordinating with the palazzo's event staff, confirming security arrangements with Matteo, personally calling each Don's wife to ensure dietary requirements were met, that old feuds were accounted for in the seating arrangements, that no family would feel slighted by their placement in the room. This was what she did. This was what she had always done. The door to her dressing room opened without a knock. Alessandro stood in the threshold, his broad shoulders filling the frame, his presence commanding even in stillness. His black suit jacket was unbuttoned, revealing the crisp white shirt beneath. The Italian script tattooed along his neck, *Il potere ha un prezzo *, caught the light as he tilted his head, studying her. "You look beautiful," he said. The words should have warmed her. They didn't, because Isabella had learned, over 12 years of marriage, to read what lived beneath her husband's words. And right now, beneath the compliment, she sensed something else. Distance. Calculation. "Thank you." She turned back to the mirror, fastening a pearl drop earring. The final guest confirmations came through this morning. All 12 families will attend. Even the Calabrians, which I wasn't certain about after the incident in March. The Calabrians. Alessandro's voice carried no interest. Don Ferraro's nephew. The one who insulted Don Marchetti's daughter at the spring reception. "I had to." "Isabella." Something in his tone made her fingers still on the second earring. She met his eyes in the mirror. "I need you to stay home tomorrow night." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and incomprehensible. "Stay home." She turned to face him fully. "Alessandro, the gala is tomorrow. I've spent 3 months." "I know." He stepped further into the room, and she noticed now what she hadn't before. The tightness around his jaw, the deliberate control in his movements. Her husband was bracing himself. There's been a change in circumstances. A political consideration. What political consideration could possibly? "Bianca Morelli will accompany me." The name landed like a blade between her ribs. Bianca Morelli. daughter of the late Enzo Morelli, whose shipping empire had been absorbed into the Valenti Holdings 3 years ago. A woman of 28, blonde, beautiful, and, according to whispered rumors, Isabella had refused to dignify with attention. Recently seen in Alessandro's company more often than propriety allowed. I see. Isabella's voice emerged steadier than she felt. 12 years of marriage to a man who showed no emotion had taught her to mirror him. And this political consideration, does it require you to publicly humiliate your wife? Or is that simply a bonus? Alessandro's steel-gray eyes flickered. It isn't humiliation. It's strategy. The Morelli holdings represent a significant expansion. Bianca's presence at my side signals the completion of that merger to everyone who matters. Everyone who matters. Isabella repeated the words slowly, tasting their bitterness. And I, your wife of 12 years, do not fall into that category. That's not what I said. No. You simply said it without saying it. She turned back to the mirror, removing the earring she'd just fastened. Her hands were steady. Her heart was not. Does your mother know about this decision? A pause. My mother's opinion on my business dealings is not relevant. Ah. Isabella set the earrings down on her vanity table, watching them glitter against the dark wood. So she doesn't know. Or she does. And she's already told you this is madness. And you've chosen to ignore her. Isabella, go. She didn't turn around. Couldn't turn around. Because if she looked at him now, he would see what she fought so hard to hide, the hairline fractures spreading through the careful composure she'd built over a decade of marriage. You've made your decision. There's nothing more to discuss. She heard him stand there for a long moment, waiting for what, she didn't know. An argument? Tears? The explosion of emotion he always seemed to expect from her but never received? Isabella Valenti did not explode. She endured. Finally, his footsteps retreated. The door closed with a soft click. Only then did she allow herself to sink onto the velvet bench before her vanity. Only then did she press her hand against her chest, feeling the rapid thunder of her heart. Only then did she whisper, to the empty room, the question she couldn't ask him. When did I become so invisible to you? Across the estate, in the study that had belonged to 3 generations of Valenti Dons, Matteo Ricci was waiting. Alessandro entered to find his right-hand man standing before the window, his dark suit jacket unbuttoned, his scarred eyebrow raised in an expression that managed to convey profound disapproval without a single word. You told her, Matteo said. I told her. Alessandro moved to the liquor cabinet, selecting a crystal decanter of aged whiskey. The Roman lion tattooed on his right forearm rippled as he poured. She took it exactly as I expected. With dignity? With frost. Alessandro lifted the glass. She'll thaw. She always does. Matteo's silence spoke volumes. Say it. Alessandro dropped into the leather chair behind his desk, fixing his advisor with a cold stare. Whatever lecture you've prepared, say it now. I've prepared no lecture. Matteo remained at the window, his weathered face illuminated by the fading evening light. I simply wonder if you've considered what the Dons will think when you arrive without her. They'll think I'm cementing a business alliance. They'll think you've lost your mind. Alessandro's glass paused halfway to his lips. Excuse me? You've been married to Isabella for 12 years. Matteo turned from the window, and for the first time, his controlled expression cracked, revealing something beneath. Frustration, perhaps, or something closer to fear. In that time, she has negotiated 17 peace treaties between feuding families. She has prevented 4 assassinations through sheer diplomatic skill. She has personally convinced Don Caruso to release his vendetta against the Bellicourt family, a vendetta that would have ignited a war across 3 territories. I'm aware of my wife's social contributions. Are you? Matteo stepped closer, his voice dropping. Because I don't think you understand what she truly is to those men, to their wives, to the entire structure that keeps this fragile peace intact. Alessandro set down his glass. She's my wife, not a political asset. She's both. And you're about to prove to every powerful family in Italy that you don't understand the difference. The room fell silent. Alessandro's fingers drummed against the arm of his chair, the Italian words inked across his knuckles. Honor e lealtà, catching the lamplight. Honor and loyalty, the words his father had taught him, the words he had tried to live by. Had he not been honorable? Had he not been loyal? He had never touched another woman, never broken his marriage vows. The arrangement with Bianca was purely strategic, a signal to the remaining Morelli loyalists that their family's legacy would be preserved, that the merger was complete and beneficial to all. Isabella would understand, eventually. She always understood. Your concern is noted, Matteo. Alessandro rose, buttoning his jacket. But I've made my decision. The Morellis are essential to our expansion, and Bianca's presence at the gala will cement that alliance in ways a photograph or press release cannot. And Isabella? Isabella will remain here. She'll recover from the insult, if she even perceives it as such. And in a week, this will all be forgotten. Matteo's expression suggested he believed none of that. But he said only, "As you wish, Don Valenti." The title landed like a slap. Matteo hadn't called him that since Alessandro's father's funeral, 15 years ago. It was a reminder, pointed and deliberate, that the role Alessandro occupied came with responsibilities he seemed determined to ignore. Alessandro chose not to acknowledge it. He had an empire to run, and his wife's feelings, however unfortunate, could not be permitted to interfere with his strategy. The morning of the gala dawned gray and heavy. Isabella stood at the window of her private sitting room, watching clouds gather over the distant hills. The burgundy gown hung in her dressing room, unworn. The pearl earrings sat in their velvet box, untouched. She had not slept. Not truly. She had lain in the vast bed she no longer shared with Alessandro. He had moved to a separate wing 2 years ago, citing early morning meetings and late-night calls that would disturb her rest, and stared at the ceiling, counting the hairline cracks in the plaster. Counting the hairline cracks in her marriage. They had been there for years, she realized. She simply hadn't wanted to see them. The distance that had grown between them wasn't sudden. It was the accumulation of 1,000 small moments. Missed dinners, canceled plans, conversations that ended before they truly began. Alessandro had been climbing, always climbing, reaching for more power, more territory, more control. And somewhere along the way, she had stopped being his partner. She had become furniture, beautiful, expensive, occasionally useful, but ultimately replaceable. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." The door opened to reveal Lucia Valenti, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her black dress impeccable despite the early hour. Alessandro's mother moved through the room like a ship cutting through still water. Graceful, unstoppable, impossible to ignore. "You look terrible," Lucia said. Despite everything, Isabella almost smiled. "Thank you, Mother. You always know exactly what to say. Don't call me Mother when you're angry with my son." Lucia settled into the chair across from Isabella, her sharp eyes missing nothing. "It feels like you're being sarcastic." "I would never." "You would absolutely." Lucia studied her daughter-in-law with the kind of penetrating attention that had always made Isabella feel both seen and slightly unsettled. "He told you about the Morelli girl." "He did. And you let him walk out without a fight. What would fighting have accomplished?" Isabella turned from the window, wrapping her arms around herself. "He's made his decision. He's always made his decisions. I've simply never been one of them." Lucia's expression softened, an occurrence so rare that Isabella almost missed it. "Sit down, child." Isabella sat. "I'm going to tell you something that I should have told you 12 years ago, on the day you married my son." Lucia leaned forward, her weathered hands clasped in her lap. "Something about Alessandro that he himself has forgotten." Isabella waited. "He was not always like this." Lucia's voice carried the weight of decades. When he was a boy, before his father began grooming him for leadership, he was different, softer. He laughed easily. He loved deeply. He felt everything with an intensity that terrified my husband. What changed? His father convinced him that feeling was weakness. Lucia's jaw tightened. That love made a man vulnerable, that a Don could not afford the luxury of emotion. So Alessandro learned to bury everything, every feeling, every attachment, every need, beneath layers of ice and strategy. Isabella's throat ached. I've seen that, the ice. What you haven't seen is what lies beneath it. Lucia rose, moving to stand before her daughter-in-law. Alessandro loves you. He has always loved you. But he has convinced himself that loving you is a liability. So he holds you at a distance, believing that the distance protects you both. And replacing me with another woman at the most important event of the year? What is that protecting? Lucia's eyes flashed. That is stupidity. Pure, unforgivable stupidity. And I have told him so. You have. I called him a fool and a coward. And I suggested that his father would be ashamed to see what his son has become. Lucia's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. He didn't take it well. I can imagine. But here is what I need you to understand, Isabella. Lucia reached out, taking her daughter-in-law's hands in her own. My son has made a catastrophic error. He has confused strategy with survival and forgotten that the heart of his power has never been his territory or his alliances or his reputation for ruthlessness. It has been you. Isabella blinked. Me? You? Lucia squeezed her hands. Who do you think holds this empire together? Who negotiates peace between men who have hated each other for generations? Who remembers every birthday, every grudge, every alliance, every slight? Who makes the wives feel valued and the daughters feel safe and the old dons feel respected? You just do what you've always done. What no one else could do. Lucia released her hands and stepped back. My son is about to discover exactly how much you matter. And when he does, when he comes crawling back, begging for forgiveness, I want you to remember this moment. What do you want me to remember? Lucia Valenti smiled. A rare, genuine smile that transformed her austere features. That you were never replaceable. You were irreplaceable. And it's about time everyone, including my idiot son, learned that truth. The hours passed like slow torture. Isabella spent the day in a haze of activity that failed to distract her from what was coming. She reviewed household accounts. She approved menu plans for the following week. She answered correspondence that had been waiting for her attention. But beneath it all, she felt the gala approaching like a gathering storm. At 6 o'clock, she watched from her window as the staff loaded Alessandro's luggage into the waiting car. At 7 o'clock, she saw the sleek black vehicle that would carry him to the palazzo. At 7:15, she glimpsed movement in the courtyard below. Alessandro emerging from the house, resplendent in a black tuxedo, his dark hair slicked back, his posture radiating power and confidence. And beside him, Bianca Morelli. The younger woman wore emerald silk that cascaded to the ground. Her blonde hair arranged in an elaborate updo, diamonds glittering at her throat. She smiled up at Alessandro with something that looked like triumph. Isabella's hands trembled against the windowsill. She watched her husband guide his companion to the car. She watched him open the door for her, a gesture of courtesy he hadn't offered Isabella in years. She watched the vehicle pull away, carrying them toward a gala that Isabella had spent months planning. And then she did something she hadn't done in 12 years of marriage. She wept. Across the city, the Palazzo Nero blazed with light. The historic building had been transformed into a masterpiece of dark elegance. Black roses cascading from crystal vases, candles flickering in silver candelabras, the finest musicians in Italy playing softly from the gallery above. It was, by every measure, a triumph of event planning. Isabella's triumph. Not that anyone would remember that now. At 7:45, the first guests began to arrive. Armored limousines lined the palazzo's circular drive, disgorging Italy's most powerful families in a parade of silk and diamonds and barely concealed tension. Don Caruso of Naples, his silver beard freshly trimmed, his wife Elena resplendent in midnight blue. Don Marchetti of Milan, younger than most but twice as ambitious, his scarred hands marking him as a man who still personally handled certain problems. Don Romano of Turin, flanked by 3 sons who moved like shadows, their eyes constantly scanning for threats, and a dozen others, the heads of families whose territories carved up Italy like a bloody jigsaw puzzle, whose feuds stretched back centuries, whose peace had been bought and maintained through careful negotiation, strategic marriages, and the tireless efforts of one woman they had all come to trust. By 7:55, the ballroom hummed with conversation. By 7:58, all eyes turned toward the grand entrance. By 8 o'clock exactly, Alessandro Valenti swept through the doors. The room went quiet, not the gradual quieting of interrupted conversation, but the sudden, suffocating silence of collective shock. Because the woman at Alessandro's side was not Isabella. Everyone recognized Bianca Morelli. Everyone understood what her presence meant. But it was Don Caruso who recovered first. The elderly Sicilian patriarch, who had known Alessandro's father, who had held Alessandro as an infant at his christening, who had watched Isabella negotiate the peace that saved his grandson's life, rose slowly from his chair and remained standing. His wife Elena looked up at him, confusion flickering across her features. "Stefano?" she whispered. "What are you?" "I will not sit," Don Caruso said, his gravelly voice carrying across the silent room, "until someone explains why Isabella Valenti is not present at her own gala." Across the room, Don Marchetti stood. Then Don Romano. Then others, one by one. The most powerful men in Italy rose to their feet and remained standing, their expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed fury. Alessandro stopped mid-stride, Bianca's hand still resting in the crook of his arm. For a moment, just a moment, his steel-gray composure cracked. "Don Caruso." He released Bianca's hand and stepped forward, his voice steady despite the alarm bells surely screaming in his mind. "My wife sends her regrets. She was feeling unwell and unwell." Don Caruso's dark eyes glittered. Isabella Valenti, who attended last year's spring reception while recovering from pneumonia, who negotiated the Calabrian Treaty while suffering from a broken wrist, who has never, in 12 years, missed a single event that required her presence. Alessandro's jaw tightened. The tattoo on his neck pulsed with his heartbeat. "I assure you." "Do not assure me of anything, boy." Don Caruso's use of the word boy landed like a blow. "I have known you since before you could walk. I watched your father build this empire, and I watched your wife hold it together after his death. Do not stand before me and lie about why she isn't here." The silence that followed was absolute. Bianca shifted uncomfortably at Alessandro's side, her earlier triumph fading into something closer to fear. She had expected whispers, perhaps some gossip. She had not expected open rebellion. "Perhaps," she murmured, too quietly for most to hear. "This was a mistake." Alessandro didn't respond. His eyes swept the room, taking in the standing dons, the seated wives whose expressions ranged from sympathetic to furious, the bodyguards along the walls whose hands had drifted toward concealed weapons. He had expected surprise. He had expected adjustment. He had not expected this. Don Enzo Torrisi, patriarch of a Venetian family whose alliance Alessandro had spent 3 years securing, stepped forward from his position near the head table. "I have a question," Torrisi said, his tone deceptively mild. "When my daughter was to marry the Bellicourt heir last spring, and the negotiations collapsed because of an old insult no one could forgive, who fixed it?" Alessandro opened his mouth to respond. "Isabella." Torrisi answered his own question. "Your wife. She spent 3 days shuttling between our estates, soothing wounded pride, finding solutions no one else could see. My daughter is happily married because of her." Another Don spoke up, Marchetti, his voice sharp. "When my mother was dying, and I needed to travel to Sicily without anyone knowing I'd left my territory unprotected, who arranged the cover? Who coordinated with 6 families to ensure no one made a move against my holdings while I was gone?" He didn't wait for an answer either. "Isabella." A third voice joined the chorus. Romano, his scarred face expressionless. "When the Calabrians were ready to go to war over the March incident, when Ferraro's nephew insulted my niece at the spring reception, who calmed the waters? Who convinced Ferraro that his nephew was young and stupid, and that a war would destroy both our families. Isabella. The name echoed through the ballroom like a refrain. Isabella. 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 Alessandro stood frozen, the weight of revelation pressing down on him like a physical force. He had known his wife was involved in these matters. He had assumed her role was supportive, secondary. He had never understood that she was the architect of his empire's stability, that without her, everything he had built would crumble. Don Caruso moved toward him now, his elderly body surprisingly commanding as he crossed the marble floor. "You have made a grave error tonight," the old man said quietly. His words meant only for Alessandro's ears. "You have shown every person in this room that you do not understand where your true power lies, that you would discard the woman who holds your alliances together as if she were nothing more than a pretty ornament." Alessandro's hands clenched at his sides. The Italian words on his knuckles, honor e lealtà, seemed to mock him. Honor and loyalty. Where was his honor now? Where was his loyalty? "I did not realize," he began. "That is precisely the problem." Caruso's eyes were hard. "You did not realize. For 12 years, your wife has worked miracles in the shadows, asking nothing in return. And instead of treasuring her, you replaced her with a child who hasn't earned the right to stand in that woman's shadow." Bianca flinched at the dismissal. Alessandro couldn't even look at her. "The gala cannot proceed," Caruso continued. "Not like this. Not without Isabella. We will not conduct business. We will not break bread. We will not pretend that this farce is acceptable." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You have until midnight to fix this. After that, I make no promises about what happens to your precious alliances." He turned and walked back to his table, where Elena waited with an expression of profound disappointment. She was looking at Alessandro the way a mother might look at a child who had failed a test she'd thought he was prepared for. He had never felt smaller. The next hour was a masterclass in awkward diplomacy. Alessandro moved through the stalled gala like a ghost, accepting cold greetings and colder glances. Conversations died when he approached. Laughter faded. The musicians continued to play, but no one danced. Bianca had retreated to a corner, her emerald gown suddenly seeming garish rather than elegant. She spoke to no one. No one spoke to her. Matteo materialized at Alessandro's side as he stood at the edge of the ballroom, watching his empire crumble in real time. "I told you," his advisor said quietly. "Now is not the time." "When will be the time?" "When the Calabrians decide this is the perfect moment to make a move. When Marchetti's alliance shifts to Bellicourt." Matteo's scarred face was grim. "You have perhaps 3 hours before word of this disaster spreads beyond this room. After that, your enemies will smell blood." Alessandro's jaw worked, the cathedral surrounded by black roses tattooed on his left forearm. A symbol of family, loyalty, sacrifice. Felt like a brand of shame. "What would you have me do?" "What you should have done from the beginning." Matteo met his eyes without flinching. "Go home. Apologize. Bring her back. And if she refuses, then you will have gotten exactly what you deserve." Alessandro said nothing, but his mind was already turning, calculating, strategizing. He had spent his entire adult life solving impossible problems, negotiating unwinnable situations, finding leverage where none seemed to exist. Surely he could fix this. Surely he could convince Isabella to forgive him, to return to his side, to save his empire from the catastrophe he had created. But even as he thought it, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a terrible truth. What if she doesn't want to be saved? What if she's finally realized she deserves better than a man who took her for granted? What if you've already lost her? Isabella was not asleep when the car pulled into the estate's drive at 10:30. She had tried to read, tried to watch television, tried to lose herself in any distraction that might ease the ache in her chest. Nothing worked. So she sat in the library, the one room in the house that had always felt like hers, and waited for the night to end. The sound of tires on gravel reached her through the window. Then voices in the foyer. Then footsteps. Heavy, purposeful, familiar. The library door opened without a knock. Alessandro stood in the threshold, still in his tuxedo, though his bow tie hung loose around his neck and his hair had fallen from its careful arrangement. He looked disheveled. She had never seen him disheveled. Isabella, her name in his mouth. How many times had she heard it over 12 years? Thousands, tens of thousands, said in passion and impatience and indifference. Never like this, never with this undercurrent of desperation. Alessandro, she didn't rise from her chair, didn't offer him entry into the space she'd claimed as her own. I wasn't expecting you until morning. The gala is on hold. On hold. She raised an eyebrow. The Black Rose Gala, the most important event of the year, is on hold? Yes. Interesting. She turned a page in the book she wasn't reading. And why would that be? He stepped into the room, and she saw something in his face she hadn't expected. Shame. Because every dawn refused to proceed without you, he said. Because I arrived expecting business as usual, and instead found myself facing an uprising. Because... He stopped, his voice catching in a way she'd never heard. Because I didn't understand. Didn't understand what? What you are. What you do. What you've been doing all these years while I convinced myself I was the one holding everything together. He moved closer, and she could see the strain around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. I thought I was protecting you, keeping you separate from the darker parts of my world. But all I did was blind myself to your importance. Isabella closed her book with a soft snap. So you've come to ask me to save your gala. I've come to ask you to save our marriage. The words hung between them. Is there a difference? She asked softly. Between the gala and the marriage? Or has everything become strategy to you? Every relationship a transaction? Alessandro dropped to his knees. She hadn't expected that. Alessandro Valenti, one of the most feared men in Europe, on his knees before her, his steel-gray eyes reflecting the firelight, his expression raw in a way she'd never witnessed. I don't know, he admitted. I don't know when I stopped seeing the difference. When I started treating you like another piece on my board instead of the woman I... He stopped. The woman you what? The woman I love. The words emerged broken, as if they'd been locked away so long they'd nearly forgotten how to exist. I love you, he continued, and she could see what it cost him to say it. This man who had been taught that love was weakness, that emotion was liability, that power required the erasure of everything soft. I have always loved you, and I have done everything in my power to pretend I didn't, because I was terrified that if I admitted it, if I let myself feel it, I would become vulnerable. And instead I became a monster. His head bowed. A man so obsessed with appearing invincible that he destroyed the only thing worth protecting. Isabella sat very still. She had dreamed of this moment. Not exactly this, not the drama of the gala, the public humiliation, but this. Alessandro on his knees. Alessandro finally admitting what she had always sensed beneath his armor of ice. She had dreamed of it. And she had also learned, over 12 years, that dreams and reality rarely aligned. You brought another woman to the most important event of our social calendar, she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her chest. You walked into a room full of people who have known me for over a decade, and you presented someone else as your partner. You humiliated me, Alessandro, publicly, deliberately. I know. Do you? Do you understand what that felt like? To watch you from my window, helping her into the car? To know that everyone we've ever worked with would see you with her and know that I had been replaced. I understand now. Now. She rose from her chair, and he remained on his knees, looking up at her. Now, when it's convenient. Now, when your alliances are threatened. Now, when the Dons have made it clear that they value me more than they value you. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He couldn't, because she was right. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he said. I'm asking you to give me a chance to earn your forgiveness. To prove that I see you now. That I understand what I've done. That I will spend the rest of my life trying to become the husband you deserve. Isabella looked down at him. this powerful man reduced to supplication before her. She thought about 12 years of loneliness in a beautiful prison. 12 years of being seen and not valued. 12 years of pouring herself into holding his empire together while he barely noticed she existed. "The gala cannot wait," she finally said. "Don Caruso gave you until midnight. I know. And if I don't return with you, your alliances will begin to crumble by morning. I know. So you need me." He looked up at her, and she saw it. The truth he couldn't hide any longer. "I've always needed you. I was just too much of a fool to admit it." Isabella walked to the window. Outside, the night was clear now. The earlier clouds dispersed to reveal a canopy of stars. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called into the darkness. She made her decision. "I'll go with you," she said. "For the sake of the families. For the sake of the peace I've spent 12 years building." Relief flooded his features. "But, Alessandro," she turned to face him, and he saw something in her eyes that made the relief curdle. "This does not mean we are fixed. This does not mean I forgive you. This means I am doing my duty, the duty I have always done, while we figure out whether there is anything left of this marriage worth saving." He nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you?" She moved toward the door. "Because if you think one apology erases 12 years of neglect, if you think falling to your knees once repairs the damage you've done, then you understand nothing at all." She paused in the threshold. "I'll need 30 minutes to dress. Have the car ready." And she was gone. Alessandro remained on his knees for a long moment after she left. When he finally rose, his legs felt unsteady beneath him. He had gotten what he came for. She would return to the gala. She would save his alliances. But as he straightened his disheveled suit, he realized that saving his marriage would require something far more difficult than strategy or negotiation. It would require becoming a different man. And he wasn't sure he knew how. At 11:15, the black limousine carrying Alessandro and Isabella Valenti pulled up to the Palazzo Nero. The message had been sent ahead. The response had been electric. When they walked through the grand entrance together, Isabella resplendent in the burgundy gown she'd originally chosen, Alessandro's hand properly positioned at the small of her back, the ballroom transformed. Don Caruso was the first to approach. The elderly patriarch took Isabella's hands in his weathered grip, his dark eyes warm for the first time all evening. "Finally," he said, "now we can begin." One by one, the Dons came forward to greet her. Not Alessandro. Her. Marchetti kissed her hand with genuine affection. Romano's stern face softened into something approaching a smile. Teresi's wife embraced her like a long-lost sister, and Isabella received them all with the grace she had always possessed, warm but dignified, grateful but not fawning. Alessandro watched from a distance. He watched his wife work the room in a way he never had, connecting, remembering, caring. He watched the most dangerous men in Europe light up in her presence. He watched and finally understood. His empire had never been built on fear. It had been built on her. The gala resumed as if the earlier drama had never occurred. Deals were made. Alliances were strengthened. The black roses gleamed in their crystal vases, and the musicians played on. But Alessandro barely heard any of it. He was watching his wife, and realizing with growing certainty that he had been granted a reprieve he did not deserve. The night progressed smoothly. Isabella moved through the gathering like water through stone, finding the cracks, filling the gaps, smoothing tensions before they could develop. She spent 20 minutes with Elena Caruso, discussing the older woman's grandchildren. She coordinated a discreet meeting between two families whose territorial dispute had been simmering for months. She even managed a civil conversation with Bianca Morelli, who had retreated to a corner and looked ready to dissolve into tears. "You should go home," Isabella told the younger woman quietly. "This isn't the place for you tonight." "I didn't know." Bianca's voice trembled. "He said it was business. A merger celebration." "I didn't know." "I believe you." Isabella's tone carried no anger, only exhaustion. "But believing you doesn't change the situation. Go home, Bianca." Salvage what you can of your reputation while there's still something to salvage. Bianca fled. Alessandro observed the interaction from across the room. He should have been grateful for his wife's diplomacy. Instead, he felt something closer to shame, because Isabella had handled the situation with more grace than he deserved, more compassion than Bianca deserved, more wisdom than anyone in the room could have expected. And he had been ready to throw her away for a business alliance. At midnight, the formal portion of the evening concluded. Guests began to drift away, satisfied and settled. Whatever tensions they'd arrived with smoothed over by good food, fine wine, and Isabella's tireless attention. Alessandro found himself standing beside Don Caruso as the older man prepared to leave. "Your wife," Caruso said, watching Isabella bid farewell to the Romano family, "is the most valuable asset you possess. Not your territory, not your money, not your reputation for ruthlessness. I'm beginning to understand that. Are you?" Caruso turned to face him, and his expression carried no warmth. "Because understanding is not enough, boy. You must act on it. You must change, or you will lose her, not to another man but to her own self-respect. And when that happens, no amount of groveling will bring her back. She agreed to come tonight. She agreed to save your empire. That is not the same as agreeing to save your marriage." Caruso shook his head slowly. "You have been given a gift, Alessandro. A second chance. Do not waste it." The old man walked away. Alessandro stood alone in the emptying ballroom, surrounded by black roses and guttering candles. The drive home passed in silence. Isabella sat on the far side of the limousine, her face turned toward the window. The burgundy gown pooled around her like spilled wine. Her hands rested in her lap, perfectly still. She had not looked at him since they left the palazzo. Alessandro tried to find words. He, who had negotiated with killers and politicians and some of the most dangerous men in the world, couldn't find the words to speak to his own wife. Finally, as they turned onto the private road leading to the estate, she spoke. "Bianca is leaving the city tomorrow." He blinked. "What?" "I arranged it. A position with the Venetian branch of your operations. Far enough away that the gossip will die quickly. Close enough that she remains useful." Isabella's voice was clinical, distant. "The Morelli merger will proceed as planned. No one needs to know about tonight's complications." "You did all that? Tonight?" "Someone had to." The words landed like a slap. Someone had to, because he hadn't thought about it. He had been so focused on convincing Isabella to return that he'd completely forgotten about managing the fallout. The gossip, the political implications, Bianca's ruined reputation. Isabella had handled it all, because she always handled everything, because that was what she did. "I'm sorry," he said. She finally looked at him. "You've already said that. I'll say it again. As many times as you need to hear it. And if I never need to hear it? If I don't want apologies, I want change. Then I'll change." "How?" She shifted to face him fully, and he saw again what he'd seen in the library, that steel beneath her softness, that strength he had somehow failed to recognize for 12 years. "How will you change, Alessandro? You've been this way your entire adult life. Cold, distant, strategic. You've built your entire identity around being untouchable. How do you propose to become a different person?" He had no answer. The limousine turned through the estate's gates. "I don't know," he admitted. "I don't know how, but I know I have to try, because the alternative—" He stopped, his voice cracking in a way it hadn't since he was a child. "The alternative is losing you, and I can't. I can't lose you, Isabella." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she looked away. "Words," she said softly. "Always words. You've been speaking to me for 12 years, Alessandro. Now I need you to show me." The car pulled to a stop before the estate's main entrance. Isabella gathered her skirt and moved toward the door. "Wait!" She paused, her hand on the handle. "What happens now?" Alessandro asked. "With us." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, still not looking at him, "I don't know. I truly don't know." She opened the door and stepped out into the night. Alessandro watched her walk up the steps and disappear into the house they had shared for 12 years, the house that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. He didn't follow immediately. Instead, he sat in the darkness, surrounded by the lingering scent of her perfume. And for the first time in his adult life, Alessandro Valenti felt genuinely afraid. Not of enemies, not of rivals, not of the violence that had defined his existence since childhood. He was afraid of himself, of the man he had become, of the damage that man had done, and of the terrifying possibility that the damage might be irreparable. In the days that followed, an uneasy truce settled over the Valenti estate. Isabella resumed her usual activities, correspondence, planning, the endless work of maintaining the social fabric that bound the empire together. She took her meals in her private sitting room. She retired early. She spoke to Alessandro only when necessary, and even then, her voice carried the politeness of a stranger rather than the warmth of a wife. Alessandro, for his part, was lost. He had spent his life knowing exactly what to do. Every situation had a solution. Every problem had a strategy. But this, his wife's cold courtesy, the vast distance she maintained even when they occupied the same room, defied every approach he could devise. He tried gestures. Flowers appeared in her sitting room, rare orchids, her favorites. She accepted them without comment. Gifts arrived, jewelry, books, things he thought she might like. She thanked him politely and set them aside. He arranged for her favorite chef to prepare her preferred meals. She ate alone anyway. Nothing worked. And the more he tried, the more he realized that his gestures were exactly that, gestures. Grand displays that required no actual change on his part. He was performing repentance, not living it. 1 week after the gala, Matteo found him in his study, staring at a stack of papers he hadn't touched. "You look terrible," his advisor observed. "Thank you for that assessment. When did you last sleep?" Alessandro couldn't remember. Matteo settled into the chair across from his desk, studying him with the clinical attention of a man who had known him for 30 years. "You can't fix this by trying harder," Matteo said finally. "That's the problem, isn't it? You think if you apply enough effort, enough strategy, you can solve this the way you solve everything else. How would you know what I'm thinking? Because I know you." Matteo leaned forward. "And I know that for you, problems are puzzles, equations, things to be analyzed and solved. But your wife isn't a problem, Alessandro. She's a person, and you can't calculate your way into her forgiveness." Alessandro's jaw tightened. "Then what am I supposed to do? Stop trying to fix it." Matteo's scarred face was unexpectedly gentle. "Start trying to understand it." "Understand what?" "What you did to her. Not the political implications. Not the damage to your alliances. What you actually did to the woman you claim to love." Matteo rose from his chair. "Until you understand that, truly understand it, nothing you do will matter." He left Alessandro alone with his thoughts. And for the first time, Alessandro allowed himself to really consider the question. What did I do to her? Not the public embarrassment, though that was significant. Not the social scandal, though that had consequences. Something deeper. Something that cut to the heart of who Isabella was, and who he had forced her to become. He thought about the past 12 years. He thought about the early days of their marriage, when she had smiled easily and reached for his hand without hesitation. When they had shared meals and conversations and occasional laughter. When had that stopped? He couldn't pinpoint the exact moment. It had happened gradually, like water wearing away stone. The late nights, the canceled plans, the emotional distance he maintained because his father had taught him that closeness was dangerous. And Isabella had adapted. She had learned to exist without his attention, without his affection, without the partnership she had been promised when she agreed to marry him. She had become essential to his empire but invisible to him. And tonight, the night of the gala, he had made that invisibility explicit. He had told her, in front of everyone who mattered, that she could be replaced, that she was replaceable, when in truth she was the only thing in his life that wasn't. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had spent 12 years breaking his wife's heart, and she had spent 12 years pretending it didn't matter. No wonder she didn't believe his apologies. Why would she? He had given her 12 years of evidence that she meant nothing to him. And now, a few flowers and some pretty words were supposed to erase all of that? The arrogance of it staggered him. He had thought he could solve this. He had thought he could fix it the way he fixed everything else, with strategy and determination and the relentless application of will. But some things couldn't be fixed. Some things could only be rebuilt. And rebuilding required something he had never been willing to give. Vulnerability. That night, Alessandro did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He wrote her a letter, not a formal communication, not a strategic message, not the kind of correspondence he was accustomed to drafting, cold, precise, designed to achieve specific outcomes. A letter, handwritten, rambling, imperfect. He sat at his desk until nearly 3 in the morning, filling page after page with words he had never allowed himself to say. He told her about his father, how the old man had beaten the softness out of him, one painful lesson at a time. He told her about the fear that had defined his childhood, the terror of being seen as weak, the armor he had built to protect himself from a world that punished vulnerability. He told her that the armor had become a prison, that he had locked himself inside it so thoroughly that he'd forgotten there was anything else. He told her about the night they'd first met, a political arrangement between families, a marriage of convenience. He told her how he'd seen her across the room, 17 and terrified but holding herself with dignity, and he'd felt something shift in his chest, something he'd spent the next 12 years trying to bury. Because if he loved her, he could be hurt, and Alessandro Valenti could not be hurt. Except, he was hurting now. The pain of watching her retreat from him was worse than any physical wound he'd ever suffered. The sight of her face, carefully blank whenever he entered a room, devastated him in ways he couldn't articulate. He had thought distance protected him. He had been wrong. Distance had merely delayed the inevitable. And now the bill had come due. The letter ran to 15 pages by the time he finished. His hand cramped, his eyes burned, but something had eased in his chest. Some pressure he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. He didn't know if it would make a difference. He didn't know if anything would. But he had told her the truth. Finally, completely, for perhaps the first time in their entire marriage. He left the letter outside her sitting room door before dawn. Then he retreated to his study and waited. Hours passed. Matteo came and went. Staff moved through the house with their usual quiet efficiency. And still Isabella didn't emerge. Alessandro forced himself to work. He reviewed reports, took calls, conducted the business of running an empire. But his mind kept drifting to the letter. Had she read it? Was she reading it now? Did she care? The uncertainty was excruciating. At noon, there was a knock at his study door. "Come in." Isabella entered. She was dressed simply. A cream silk blouse, dark trousers, her hair loose around her shoulders. No jewelry, no makeup. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. But today there was something different about her. A softening around her eyes. A crack in the careful armor she'd been wearing all week. "I read your letter," she said. Alessandro rose from his desk but didn't approach her. He didn't trust himself to be close to her right now. Didn't trust himself not to reach for her and shatter whatever fragile progress might be occurring. And I have questions." She crossed to the window, the same window where Matteo had stood a week ago, delivering warnings Alessandro had refused to hear. "You wrote that you loved me from the beginning." Her voice was steady but quiet. "That you saw me across the room at our first meeting and felt something shift." "Yes." "Then why?" She turned to face him. "Why have you spent 12 years acting like I was invisible? If you loved me, why did you treat me like I was nothing?" The question cut deep. But he had promised himself, sometime between midnight and dawn, as he filled those 15 pages, that he would tell her the truth, no matter how much it hurt. "Because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Of losing you." He moved toward her, then stopped, giving her space. "My father taught me that love was the greatest weakness a man could have." that enemies would use it against you, that the moment you cared about someone more than your own survival, you were already dead. So you decided not to care. I decided to pretend I didn't care. It's not the same thing. He ran a hand through his hair. A gesture of vulnerability he would never have permitted himself a week ago. I thought if I kept you at a distance, you'd be safe. If no one knew how much you meant to me, no one could use you as leverage against me. And instead I pushed you away, made you feel worthless, took for granted the very person I was trying to protect. His voice cracked. I was so focused on guarding against threats from outside that I became the biggest threat of all. Isabella was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she crossed the room toward him. She stopped when they were barely a foot apart. Close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. Close enough that he could smell her perfume. Jasmine and something sweeter beneath. Close enough that reaching for her would have been the most natural thing in the world. He kept his hands at his sides. I want to believe you, she said softly. I want to believe that the man who wrote that letter is who you really are. But, Alessandro, I know. His voice was barely a whisper. I know I haven't earned your trust. I know words mean nothing after 12 years of silence. But I'm asking you, I'm begging you, to give me a chance to prove it. Prove what? That I can be different. That I can be the husband you deserve. He swallowed hard. That I can learn to love you the way you should have been loved from the beginning. She studied his face for what felt like an eternity. Then she reached up. Her fingers brushed against his jaw, a touch so light it was barely there, but it burned through him like fire. One chance, she said. Not because you've earned it, but because I spent 12 years waiting for this. 12 years hoping that the man I glimpsed on our wedding night, the one who held my hand during the ceremony and looked at me like I mattered, would come back. He's here. Alessandro's voice broke. He never left. He just forgot how to exist. Then help him remember. She withdrew her hand. Show me. Not with grand gestures or expensive gifts. Show me with the small things, the everyday things, the things that actually matter. I will. We'll see. She turned and walked toward the door. Isabella. She paused but didn't turn around. Thank you, he said, for giving me this chance. I won't waste it. She was quiet for a moment. Then, still facing away from him. I'll believe that when I see it. She left, and Alessandro stood alone in his study, his heart pounding. He had been given a reprieve. Now came the hard part, becoming the man he'd promised to be. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. 3 days later, a message arrived. It came through back channels, the kind of communication that bypassed official lines, that whispered through the shadows where ordinary people never looked. Matteo brought it to Alessandro personally. His face was grim. We have a problem. Alessandro took the envelope, noting the black wax seal pressed with an unfamiliar crest. He broke it. Read the contents. Felt his blood run cold. Dante Bellicourt, he breathed. He's making a move. Matteo's voice was tight, taking advantage of the fracture at the gala. He's been reaching out to families who attended, spreading rumors that your marriage is finished, that you've lost control, that it's time for new leadership. Alessandro's hands clenched around the letter. Dante Bellicourt, the one enemy he had never been able to neutralize. The man who had been circling his territory for years, waiting for exactly this kind of vulnerability. Who has he contacted? Marchetti, the Calabrians, possibly the Venetians, though Torrisi hasn't confirmed. Matteo's scarred face was deeply troubled. He's offering them favorable terms. Trade agreements, territory concessions, everything they might want if they shift their loyalty. And, so far, they're holding. But Don Caruso's warning was accurate. People are watching, waiting. If you don't stabilize your position quickly, he didn't need to finish. Alessandro understood. The stability of his empire had always rested on perceived strength, on the belief that he was unshakable, on the careful web of alliances that bound the families together. And he had damaged all of that badly in a single night of arrogance. Now Dante Bellicourt was moving to exploit the damage. "There's something else," Matteo said. "What?" "The letter mentions Isabella specifically." Matteo's expression was unreadable. "Bellicourt suggests that your treatment of her has revealed something important about your judgment. He's implying that any man who would humiliate his wife so publicly cannot be trusted to honor agreements with other families." "That's effective." "It's effective, Alessandro." Matteo cut him off. "Because it plays on exactly what everyone witnessed at the gala. You showed them that Isabella doesn't matter to you. Bellicourt is using that to argue that nothing matters to you except your own interests." Alessandro's mind raced. The political implications were severe. The personal implications were worse. Because this threat wouldn't just affect his empire. It would affect Isabella. He's targeting her, Alessandro realized. Not just politically. He's suggesting that she's vulnerable, unprotected, that I've abandoned her. Yes. Which means she could become a target in a very literal sense. Matteo's voice was grave. "If Bellicourt decides that the best way to destabilize you further is to strike at what you value most." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Alessandro was already moving. He found Isabella in the garden, sitting on the stone bench beneath the old oak tree. The afternoon light filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows across her face. She looked peaceful. He was about to shatter that peace. "We need to talk." She looked up, and he saw wariness flicker across her features, the same wariness that had lived in her eyes since the gala. But she set aside the book she'd been reading. "What's wrong?" He sat beside her, close, but not touching, and he told her everything. About Bellicourt, about the threat to his alliances, about the implications of the letter, the suggestion that she might become a target. He held nothing back. No strategy, no spin, no attempt to minimize or manage her reaction. Just truth, raw and complete. When he finished, Isabella was silent for a long moment. Then she said something he hadn't expected. "Well, this is inconvenient." Alessandro blinked. "Inconvenient? I was just starting to believe you might be capable of change." She turned to face him fully, and he saw that her hazel eyes weren't frightened. They were calculating. "And now I have to deal with Dante Bellicourt trying to use me as a pawn in whatever game he's playing." "You don't have to deal with anything. I'll handle." "You'll handle nothing by yourself." Her voice carried a sharpness that silenced him immediately. "That's what got us into this mess. You handling everything. Making decisions without consulting me. Treating me like a decorative piece to be moved around at your convenience." "Isabella, Dante Bellicourt thinks I'm vulnerable because you humiliated me publicly." She rose from the bench, and he was struck again by the steel beneath her softness, the strength he had somehow failed to see for 12 years. "He thinks the families will turn against you because they saw how little you value your wife. That's not." "Let me finish." She began to pace, her movements precise and controlled. "He's wrong about one thing. The families don't distrust you because you devalued me. They distrust you because you didn't understand my value. There's a difference." Alessandro was silent. "The Dons refused to sit at the gala because they respect me, because I've earned their trust through years of careful work. They weren't protesting your treatment of me. They were making a statement about their own values." She stopped pacing and turned to face him. "Bellicourt is trying to exploit what he thinks is a weakness. But he doesn't understand what actually happened." "And what actually happened?" "You made a mistake. A terrible, public, humiliating mistake." Her voice softened slightly. "But you're also trying to correct it. And the families are watching that too." Alessandro felt something shift in his chest. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe just the beginning of understanding. "So what do we do?" he asked. "How do we handle Bellicourt?" Isabella smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd directed at him in over a week. "We handle him together," she said. "As partners. The way we should have been handling everything from the beginning. And despite everything. Despite the threat and the uncertainty and the mountain of mistakes he still needed to address." Alessandro felt something unfamiliar bloom in his chest. Pride. Pride in this woman he had married. Pride in the partner he had almost lost. Pride that, somehow, she was willing to stand beside him. Even now. That evening they convened in Alessandro's study, the three of them. Alessandro, Isabella, and Matteo. The atmosphere was different than it had been before. Isabella sat at the desk beside her husband. Not behind him, not at a distance, beside him, as an equal. Matteo noted the change with a subtle nod of approval. Bellecourt's strategy is clever, Isabella began, spreading several papers across the desk. He's not threatening open war, that would unite the families against him. Instead, he's undermining confidence, suggesting that Alessandro's judgment is compromised, offering better terms to anyone willing to shift allegiances. The Marchettis are the most vulnerable, Matteo added. Their territory borders Bellecourt's. If he offers favorable trade terms, Don Marchetti won't betray us. Isabella's voice was certain. His daughter's marriage to the Bellecourt heir was my doing. He knows that without that alliance, his family would have been absorbed years ago. You arranged that marriage? Alessandro hadn't known. Isabella glanced at him. There are many things I've arranged that you don't know about. That was rather my point when we discussed your lack of attention. He deserved that. He let it pass without comment. The question, Isabella continued, is whether Bellecourt's undermining campaign can gain enough momentum before we address it. If he convinces even 2 or 3 families to waver, the perception of weakness becomes reality. Then we need a show of strength, Matteo said. Something public. Something undeniable. Strength alone won't work. Alessandro spoke for the first time, his voice thoughtful. Bellecourt is exploiting the perception that I don't value relationships, that I'm purely transactional. A show of force would confirm that perception. Isabella nodded slowly. He's right. The families responded at the gala because they felt I had been dishonored. What we need isn't a demonstration of power. It's a demonstration of partnership. She fell silent, her brow furrowed in thought. Matteo and Alessandro exchanged glances. Then Isabella's expression cleared. A renewal, she said. A vow renewal ceremony. Public. Formal. With every family invited. Alessandro stared at her. You want me to renew our vows? I want us to demonstrate, in front of everyone who matters, that what happened at the gala was an aberration. That our partnership is stronger than one night of poor judgment. She met his eyes steadily. It's what the families want to see. Proof that the stability they've relied on isn't actually threatened. And you? Alessandro asked quietly. Is it what you want? She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze traveled over his face, searching for something. Whatever she found there, it seemed to satisfy her. I think, she said slowly, that I want the chance to decide what our marriage means, not to have it decided for us by public perception or political necessity. If we do this, if we stand before those families and reaffirm our commitment, it should be because we mean it. I mean it. Then show me. She reached across the desk and took his hand, the first time she had voluntarily touched him since before the gala. Not with words, with actions. Show me, in the days leading up to this ceremony, that you understand what partnership actually means. Her hand was warm in his. He held it like something precious, like something he couldn't afford to lose. I will, he promised, and this time he intended to keep it. The days that followed were unlike anything in the Valenti estate's recent memory. Alessandro canceled meetings. He declined calls. He handed non-critical matters to Matteo and his other advisors. And he focused, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, on being present. He had breakfast with Isabella every morning, not a hurried affair before disappearing into his study, but a genuine meal where they talked. About everything. About nothing. About the garden and the staff and the latest gossip from the families. About the past. About all the years they had lost. I used to dream about leaving, Isabella admitted one morning, her coffee cup warming her hands. Not often, but sometimes when the loneliness got bad enough, I would imagine what it would be like to just disappear. Start over somewhere no one knew my name. The admission hit Alessandro like a physical blow. Why didn't you? Because I made a commitment. She met his eyes. Because I believed, stupidly perhaps, that someday you would see me. Really see me. And I wanted to be there when it happened. And now I'm waiting to see if this version of you is real. She set down her cup. Or if it's just another strategy. He couldn't blame her for the doubt. He had spent 12 years teaching her not to trust him. Earning her trust back would take time. But he had time, if she was willing to give it to him. The days passed in a strange new rhythm. Alessandro learned things about his wife he had never known. That she painted small watercolors of the garden, hidden away in a closet because she'd never felt her work was good enough to display. That she spoke 5 languages fluently, not the 3 he'd assumed. That she had once wanted to study medicine, before her family's financial situation had required a different kind of sacrifice. You could still study, he told her one afternoon, as they walked through the gardens. If you wanted to, we have the resources. I'm 43, Alessandro. And she laughed. A genuine laugh, surprised out of her by his earnestness. And medical school is for young people with their whole lives ahead of them. You have your whole life ahead of you. We both do. He stopped walking and turned to face her. Isabella, the life we've been living, it doesn't have to be the life we keep living. If there are things you want, dreams you set aside, we can pursue them. Together. She studied his face, looking perhaps for the catch, for the strategic angle, for the Alessandro she had known for 12 years. You mean that? She said finally. Not a question. I do. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. And they continued walking, together. But even as they rebuilt, the threat of Dante Bellicourt loomed. 3 days before the planned vow renewal ceremony, Matteo brought news that shattered the fragile peace. The Calabrians are wavering, he reported, his scarred face grim. Don Ferraro met with Bellicourt yesterday. Unofficial but not secret. Isabella went still. Alessandro's jaw tightened. Ferraro's nephew, Isabella murmured. The one from the spring incident. I thought that matter was resolved. It was. But Bellicourt is offering him something better than resolution. Matteo laid a document on the desk. Territory. A slice of Romano's northern holdings, to be transferred if Ferraro shifts his allegiance. Romano will never agree to that. Romano doesn't know. This is Bellicourt's play. He's promising things that don't belong to him, counting on chaos to create the opportunity. Matteo's expression was dark. If Ferraro commits and Bellicourt moves on Romano's territory, we'll be looking at open conflict between 3 families. Exactly the kind of instability he's been hoping to create. Alessandro was already reaching for his phone. Isabella's hand on his arm stopped him. Wait. He looked at her. If you call Ferraro now, you'll be reacting. Defending. That's what Bellicourt wants. To keep you off balance. Responding to his moves instead of making your own. Then what do you suggest? Let me handle it. The words hung in the air. Alessandro's first instinct was to refuse. To protect her. To keep her away from the dangerous game that Bellicourt was playing. But he remembered what she'd said about partnership. About being equals. About not being moved around like a decorative piece. How? He asked instead. Isabella smiled. It was a sharp smile. The smile of a woman who had spent 12 years managing impossible situations without recognition. Leave that to me. Isabella's plan was elegant in its simplicity. She didn't call Don Ferraro. She called his wife. Maria Ferraro had been Isabella's ally for 8 years. They had navigated countless social minefields together. They had shared confidences that their husbands never knew about. Maria owed Isabella a debt she had never been able to repay. The conversation lasted 2 hours. When it ended, Isabella set down her phone and turned to find Alessandro watching from the doorway. Well, Maria will handle her husband. The meeting with Bellicourt was his advisor's idea. They've been pushing for expansion, and Bellicourt's offer seemed like opportunity. Isabella's voice was calm, controlled. But Maria has information about Bellicourt that her husband doesn't. Information that will make the prospect of alliance considerably less appealing. What kind of information? Isabella's expression flickered. The kind that stays between women. The kind that men prefer not to know about but that shapes their worlds nonetheless. Alessandro absorbed this. There's an entire network, isn't there? He said slowly. Among the wives. Information. Favors. Debts. Things that never appear in any official channels. Of course there is. Isabella's tone carried a hint of the frustration she'd been suppressing for years. How do you think peace has been maintained all this time? Your negotiations and treaties are important, but they're built on foundations you've never seen. Relationships cultivated over decades. Trust built in small moments. Loyalty earned through kindness and discretion. She moved past him into the hallway. The Ferraros will remain aligned, but Bellicourt will try again with another family, another angle. We need to be ready. Alessandro followed her. We? He asked. She stopped and turned. Yes, we. Her hazel eyes held his. If you meant what you said about partnership, this is what it looks like. Not you handling the serious matters while I manage social niceties. But us, working together, using all the tools at our disposal. And if I'm not used to working this way, then you'll learn. She reached up and touched his face, a gesture that had become more frequent in recent days, though still rare enough to feel precious. I've had to learn many things in this marriage, Alessandro. It's past time you did the same. She walked away before he could respond. But he didn't need to respond. His answer would be in his actions, in the choices he made, in the partner he chose to become. The night before the vow renewal ceremony, Isabella couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching moonlight silver the gardens below. Tomorrow, she would stand before the most powerful families in Italy and recommit herself to her marriage. To Alessandro. To a future that, a month ago, she had almost given up hoping for. Was she ready? Could she trust that his change was genuine? Could she risk her heart again after so many years of protecting it? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. The door opened. Alessandro stood in the threshold, dressed in simple sleep clothes, his dark hair disheveled. He looked younger like this, more like the man she had glimpsed on their wedding night all those years ago. I couldn't sleep either, he said. She gestured toward the chair near the window. He sat, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Alessandro said, I've been thinking about tomorrow. So have I. I want you to know. He paused, searching for words. Whatever happens, whether this ceremony changes things between us or not, I meant what I said. About trying. About being different. I know. You don't sound convinced. I'm not. She turned from the window to face him. Conviction comes with time, Alessandro. With consistent action. Not with promises made in moments of crisis. Then I'll be consistent. We'll see. He nodded slowly. I deserve your skepticism, he admitted. I've earned it. But I want you to know. He stopped again, and she saw him struggle with words that had never come easily. I want you to know that tomorrow, when I stand in front of those families and commit myself to you again, I won't be performing. I won't be strategizing. I'll be telling the truth. Which is? He rose from the chair, crossed to where she stood by the window, and took her hands in his. That I love you, he said. That I have always loved you, even when I was too frightened and foolish to show it. That losing you would destroy me more completely than any enemy ever could. And that I will spend the rest of my life. His voice broke. The rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. Isabella's eyes burned. She had waited so long to hear these words, had dreamed of them, had almost given up hoping for them. And now, I believe you mean it, she whispered. In this moment right now, I believe you mean it. I do. But tomorrow, next week, next year, she shook her head slowly. That's when belief becomes faith. And faith requires more than one night of beautiful words. Then I'll give you more. His hands tightened around hers. Every night, every day, for as long as it takes. She studied his face in the moonlight, saw the sincerity there, the vulnerability he had spent a lifetime hiding. And despite everything, despite the years of loneliness and neglect, despite the humiliation of the gala, despite every reason she had to protect herself, she made a choice. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, okay, I'll try to." She reached up and touched his face. "I'll try to trust you, to believe that this version of you is real, to build something new instead of just mourning what we lost." Alessandro's breath caught. "You don't know what that means to me." "I think I do." Her thumb traced the line of his jaw. "Because I feel it too." For a long moment, they stood there, close but not quite touching, balanced on the edge of something new. Then Alessandro bent his head and kissed her. It was gentle, tentative. Nothing like the controlled, purposeful kisses they'd shared in the public eye. This was real. This was hopeful. This was a beginning. When they pulled apart, Isabella's cheeks were wet with tears. She hadn't realized she was crying. "Tomorrow," she said, "we start fresh." "Tomorrow," he agreed. And for the first time in 12 years, Isabella Valenti felt something she had almost forgotten. Hope. The morning of the vow renewal ceremony dawned clear and bright. Isabella stood before her mirror, dressed in ivory silk that caught the light with every movement. Her dark chestnut hair fell in soft waves around her shoulders. Diamonds glittered at her ears, a gift from Alessandro that morning, presented not as a grand gesture but as a quiet token. "My mother's," he had said. "She wanted you to have them. For today." Lucia Valenti had appeared at that moment, silver-haired and regal, to fasten the earrings herself. "You look beautiful," the older woman said, "and my son looks terrified," which is exactly as it should be. Now, as Isabella prepared to descend to the ceremony, she heard a commotion in the hallway. Raised voices, running footsteps. Her door burst open. Matteo stood in the threshold, his scarred face pale. "We have a problem." The words fell like stones into still water. Isabella's hands stilled on her silk skirt. "What kind of problem?" "Bellicourt." Matteo's voice was tight. "He's made his move." While everyone was focused on the ceremony, "He's taken Don Romano's daughter." The world seemed to tilt. "Giuliana." Isabella's voice came out barely above a whisper. "He's taken Giuliana Romano?" "Grabbed her from her car 30 minutes ago, on her way here." Matteo's dark eyes were hard with controlled fury. "He's demanding a meeting with Alessandro. Alone. No security. No witnesses. That's insane. Alessandro would never." "Alessandro is already preparing to go." Isabella moved before she finished thinking. Through the door. Down the hallway. Following the sounds of urgent voices to Alessandro's study. She found him there, surrounded by armed men, his face carved from stone. But his eyes burned with a fury she had never seen. "Alessandro." He turned at her voice, saw her standing in the doorway in her ivory wedding dress, diamonds at her ears, looking like everything he had almost thrown away. "Go back upstairs," he said. "Stay safe. I'll handle this." "No." The word stopped everyone. "No." Alessandro's voice carried warning. "Isabella, this isn't the time for partnership?" She crossed the room, ignoring the armed men, until she stood before him. "Funny, I thought that's exactly what we discussed. Making decisions together. Not you handling the dangerous matters while I wait upstairs like a decorative piece." "He has Romano's daughter." "I know. Which means Romano will be demanding blood. Which means your alliance with his family hangs by a thread. Which means you need me." She held his gaze. "Not safe upstairs. Here. Helping you figure out how to fix this." Alessandro's jaw worked. She could see the conflict in him, the old instincts screaming to protect her, to keep her away from danger, warring with the new understanding of who she actually was, what she was capable of. "The meeting is in 1 hour, he said finally. "At the old warehouse district. He's chosen ground that's difficult to secure." "Then we don't try to secure it." Isabella's mind was already racing. "We do something he doesn't expect." "Such as?" She looked around the room at the assembled men. At Matteo, scarred and loyal. At the soldiers who had served the Valenti family for decades. At Alessandro, who was finally, looking at her like an equal. Bellecourt thinks he understands your vulnerabilities, she said slowly. He thinks the gala revealed something true, that you don't value relationships, that you're purely transactional. He's betting that you'll come alone, negotiate in self-interest, sacrifice Juliana if the cost becomes too high. And he's wrong. Isabella's voice hardened. About all of it, but especially about what he thinks he knows about me. 45 minutes later, a convoy of black vehicles wound through the industrial outskirts of the city. The warehouse district sprawled before them. Abandoned buildings, broken windows, the remnants of an economy that had moved on to shinier shores. In the lead car, Alessandro sat rigid. Beside him, Isabella had exchanged her ivory wedding dress for dark tactical clothing. Matteo had objected. Alessandro had objected. Everyone had objected. But Isabella had been immovable. He's using a woman as leverage, she said. He'll expect men with guns. He won't expect me. And so here they were, driving toward a confrontation that could end in blood, or could end something far worse. The vehicles stopped at the warehouse entrance. Alessandro turned to Isabella. Last chance to stay in the car. Last chance to stop underestimating me. Despite everything, a ghost of a smile crossed his face. I'm beginning to think I never knew you at all. You didn't. She reached for the door handle. But you're learning. The warehouse interior was vast and empty. Shafts of light fell through broken skylights, illuminating dust motes and decay. At the far end, Dante Bellecourt waited. He stood flanked by a dozen armed men, his silver-threaded hair immaculate, his cold eyes watching as Alessandro and Isabella approached. Behind him, bound to a chair, sat Juliana Romano. The young woman's face was tear-streaked but defiant. She saw Isabella and something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or hope. Bellecourt's gaze moved from Alessandro to Isabella, and for just a moment, confusion crossed his features. I said alone, Valenti. You said no security, no witnesses. Alessandro's voice was ice. My wife is neither. Your wife. Bellecourt's lip curled. The same wife you replaced at the gala? The one you publicly humiliated in front of every family that matters. The same wife who holds those families' loyalty in her hands. Alessandro stopped walking, leaving 30 feet between them. The same wife without whom your little scheme would have already succeeded. The same wife you apparently don't understand at all. Bellecourt's eyes narrowed. What's your play here, Valenti? You can't actually think this woman's presence changes anything. I think it changes everything. Isabella stepped forward. Don Bellecourt. Her voice carried across the empty space, steady and clear. You've made a miscalculation. Have I? You believed what you saw at the gala. That my husband doesn't value me. That our marriage is a weakness to be exploited. She continued moving forward, one deliberate step at a time. You thought that by striking at Don Romano's daughter, a young woman under my protection, you would force my husband into a corner. And I have. No. Isabella stopped walking, still 20 feet from Bellecourt. You've simply revealed your own misunderstanding. You see, Dante, may I call you Dante? The families didn't refuse to sit at the gala because they felt sorry for me. They refused because they respect me, because they trust me, because I have spent 12 years earning their loyalty through service and discretion and genuine care. Bellecourt's expression flickered. What you saw that night wasn't a humiliated woman, Isabella continued. It was a wife whose husband had temporarily lost his mind. And what you're seeing now isn't a marriage of convenience. It's a partnership that has finally, become what it should have been all along. She glanced back at Alessandro. He gave her a slight nod. So here's what's going to happen, Isabella said, turning back to Bellecourt. You're going to release Juliana Romano. You're going to walk away from this warehouse without the alliance you were hoping to shatter. And you're going to remember, for the rest of your life, that you underestimated the wrong woman. Bellecourt's face contorted. You think pretty words will. I think, Isabella interrupted, that you should check your phone. For a moment, Bellecourt didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his mobile. His face went white. What is this? That would be every banking access code for your offshore accounts. Every record of your illegal transactions. Every piece of evidence that would send you to prison for 3 lifetimes. Isabella's voice was calm, conversational, almost pleasant. Courtesy of Maria Ferraro, who was happy to share once she understood what you'd done to her goddaughter. Bellecourt's head snapped toward Juliana. The young woman managed a weak smile. Surprise, she whispered. Maria Ferraro is many things, Isabella said, including godmother to Juliana Romano. Something you might have discovered if you'd bothered to understand the relationships you were trying to exploit. She took another step forward. Here's what you failed to realize, Dante. The women in these families. We talk. We share. We protect each other. While men like you plan your wars and your takeovers, we build networks you can't see and alliances you can't break. Bellecourt's hand trembled on his phone. Around him, his men shifted nervously, sensing the power dynamics in the room tilting in ways they hadn't anticipated. You're bluffing, Bellecourt said, but his voice lacked conviction. You can't possibly have. Every transaction from the past 15 years. Isabella's voice cut through his denial like a blade. Every bribe to every official. Every payment to every assassin. Every shipment that moved through ports you swore you had no connection to. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Maria has been collecting this information for 8 years. Dante. Ever since you arranged the accident that killed her brother. Bellecourt's face went from white to gray. That was never proven? No. But Maria knew. She always knew. Isabella's hazel eyes were cold now, colder than Alessandro had ever seen them. She's been waiting for the right moment. And when you took her goddaughter, you gave her that moment. The warehouse fell silent. Juliana Romano sat straighter in her chair, her tear-streaked face now carrying something closer to triumph. Alessandro watched his wife with a kind of awe he'd never felt before. This was Isabella. The real Isabella.
The woman who had held his empire together for 12 years while he remained willfully blind. So here are your options, Isabella continued, her voice steady as stone. Option 1. You release Juliana, walk away, and pray that Maria's evidence stays buried. You'll lose face, certainly. Your reputation will suffer. But you'll be alive and free. And Option 2? Option 2 is that this evidence goes to every family you've ever crossed, every official you've ever bribed, and every international authority with an interest in organized crime. Isabella smiled, a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. You'll spend the rest of your very short life running from people who want you dead. And believe me, Dante, there are many of them. Bellecourt stood frozen. His men looked to him for direction, their hands on their weapons, but their eyes uncertain. The mathematics of the situation were simple. He had one hostage. Isabella had his entire life. You think you've won, Bellecourt said slowly. But this isn't over. The families will remember this weakness. They'll remember that Valeni had to hide behind his wife's skirts. The families will remember, Alessandro spoke for the first time, his voice cutting through the dusty air, that my wife walked into a hostage situation unarmed and walked out with everything she wanted. They'll remember that she protected one of their daughters when I couldn't. They'll remember that while you were playing games, she was solving problems. He moved to stand beside Isabella, not in front of her, not behind her, but beside her, where he should have been standing all along. And they'll remember, he continued, that Alessandro Valeni finally understood what his wife was worth, which is more than you ever will. Bellecourt's jaw worked. For a long, terrible moment, Isabella thought he might choose violence anyway, thought he might decide that going down fighting was better than the humiliation of surrender. Then, release her. His men hesitated. Release her. Bellecourt's voice cracked with barely contained fury. One of the armed men moved to Juliana's chair, cutting the ropes that bound her wrists. The young woman stood on shaky legs, but her chin remained high. She walked across the warehouse floor toward Isabella, each step steady despite her obvious exhaustion. When she reached them, Isabella caught her arm, steadying her. "Are you hurt?"
No.
Juliana's voice was hoarse but strong. "Just scared. And very, very angry." "Good." Isabella's expression softened slightly. "Anger is useful. We'll channel it later." She guided the young woman behind her, positioning herself between Juliana and Bellecourt's men. "We're leaving now," Isabella announced. "And, Dante, I suggest you take a long trip somewhere far from Italy. Because when Don Romano hears what you've done to his daughter, he won't be as merciful as I've been." Bellecourt's eyes blazed with impotent fury. But he said nothing, did nothing, because there was nothing left to do. Isabella turned and walked toward the warehouse entrance, Juliana at her side. Alessandro fell into step beside them, his armed men forming a protective perimeter. Behind them, Dante Bellecourt stood alone in the shafts of dusty light, his empire of schemes crumbling around him. The drive back to the Valeni estate was silent. Juliana had collapsed against the seat, exhaustion finally overwhelming her now that the immediate danger had passed. Her eyes were closed, but Isabella doubted she was truly sleeping. Alessandro sat on Isabella's other side, his hand wrapped around hers. He hadn't let go since they'd entered the vehicle. That was... He stopped, apparently unable to find words. "Terrifying?" Isabella supplied. "Reckless? Potentially catastrophic." "Extraordinary." His voice was rough. "You were extraordinary." She turned to look at him. In the dim light of the car's interior, his steel-gray eyes held something she hadn't seen in years. Wonder. "I've been extraordinary for 12 years, she said quietly. "You just never notice." He flinched. I know I didn't." His grip on her hand tightened. "But I'm noticing now. And I swear to you, Isabella, I will never stop noticing again." She wanted to believe him. Part of her did believe him. But trust, she knew, was built in small moments over long years. Not in dramatic declarations during crisis. "We'll see," she said. He nodded, accepting the uncertainty, accepting that he had work still to do. "The ceremony," he said after a moment. "Everyone will be waiting. Do you still want to?" "Yes." The word came out before she'd fully considered it. But as soon as she said it, she knew it was true. "Yes," she repeated. "I still want to go through with it. Not because of the families. Not because of politics." She turned to face him fully. "Because despite everything, I'm choosing this. I'm choosing us. I'm choosing to believe that the man I saw today, the man who stood beside me instead of in front of me, is the man you're becoming." Alessandro's breath caught. "Isabella, don't make promises," she interrupted. "Don't make speeches. Just show me. Every day, from now until forever. Show me that today wasn't an exception." "I will." "Then let's go get remarried." The vow renewal ceremony took place 3 hours later than planned. The delay had only intensified the speculation among the gathered families. Rumors flew through the Palazzo Nero like wildfire. Something had happened with Bellecourt. The Romano girl had been taken. Isabella Valeni had somehow been involved. By the time Alessandro and Isabella walked into the transformed ballroom, every eye in the room was fixed on them. And what they saw made the whispers die. Isabella wore ivory silk that flowed around her like water, diamonds glittering at her ears. But her eyes carried something new. Something fierce and certain and unafraid. Alessandro walked beside her, his hand at the small of her back. But this time, there was no possessiveness in the gesture. Only partnership. Only support. Only the visible acknowledgement that they moved through the world together. Don Romano was the first to approach. His weathered face was set in hard lines, his dark eyes burning with the cold fury of a father who had nearly lost his child. "Juliana told me what happened," he said, his voice low enough that only Alessandro and Isabella could hear. "What you did for her. Both of you." "She's safe," Isabella said. "That's what matters." What matters is that you walked into that warehouse unarmed, knowing what Bellacourt was capable of, to save my daughter. Romano's voice cracked slightly. I owe you a debt I can never repay. You owe me nothing. Isabella reached out and took his hands in hers. Juliana is family. That's what family does. Romano blinked rapidly. Then, in a gesture that shocked everyone who witnessed it, the grizzled old Don bent his head and kissed Isabella's hands. You have my loyalty, he said formally. From this day until my last. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I am yours to command. He stepped back, and one by one, the other Dons came forward. Marchetti, Torrisi, Ferraro, Caruso, each offering their respects not to Alessandro, but to Isabella, each acknowledging, in their own way, that the woman they had always respected was now undeniably, unmistakably, one of the most powerful figures in their world. Alessandro watched it all with an expression of quiet pride. This was his wife. This was the woman he had almost thrown away. This was the partner he had finally learned to see. The ceremony itself was simple. No grand speeches. No elaborate rituals. Just Alessandro and Isabella, standing before the gathered families, their hands joined, and their voices, clear and steady, making promises they both intended to keep. I, Alessandro Valeni, take you, Isabella, as my partner. Not my possession. Not my accessory. My partner. Alessandro's steel-gray eyes held hers. I promise to see you, truly see you, every day. To value your strength as much as your beauty. To stand beside you instead of in front of you. To learn from you as much as I protect you. His voice broke slightly. And to spend the rest of my life earning the love I've always had but never deserved. Isabella's eyes glistened. She had dreamed of hearing words like these. And now, surrounded by the most powerful families in Italy, they were being spoken aloud. For everyone to hear. For everyone to witness. I, Isabella Valenti, take you, Alessandro, as my partner. Her voice was steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. I promise to trust you again. Not because you've earned it yet, but because I choose to give you the chance. I promise to let you in, even when it's easier to stay guarded. I promise to be patient while you learn to be the husband I've always needed.
She paused.
And I promise to love you, not the man you were, but the man you're becoming. The words hung in the air. Then Alessandro lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them, a gesture that echoed Romano's earlier, but carried an entirely different weight. Reverence, gratitude, hope. The gathered families erupted in applause. The reception that followed was unlike any in the Valeni family's history. The tension that had pervaded the original gala was gone, replaced by something warmer, something genuine. Isabella moved through the crowd with Alessandro at her side, truly at her side now, not ahead of her, not leaving her to manage alone. He introduced her not as his wife, but as his partner. He deferred to her in conversations about alliances and agreements. He watched her navigate the complex social waters with an attention he had never shown before. And the families noticed. Don Caruso approached them late in the evening, his weathered face creased in a rare smile. You've changed, boy, he said to Alessandro. I wasn't sure you had it in you. I had a good teacher. Alessandro's hand found Isabella's. I should have paid attention years ago.
Yes.
You should have. Caruso's dark eyes twinkled. But better late than never. He turned to Isabella. You've done something remarkable tonight. Not just the ceremony, though that was lovely, but earlier, what you did for the Romano girl. Isabella shook her head. I only did what anyone would.
No.
Caruso's voice was firm. You did what only you could have done. Because only you had the relationships.
The trust.
The information. He paused. You've built something in this world, Isabella. Something far more powerful than territory or weapons. You've built a network of loyalty that no amount of money can buy. His eyes moved to Alessandro. Guard her well, he said. Not because she needs protection, clearly she doesn't, but because she deserves to be cherished. And if you forget that again... He didn't finish the threat. He didn't need to. I won't forget, Alessandro said quietly. Never again. Caruso nodded, apparently satisfied. He walked away, leaving them alone in a brief bubble of privacy amid the crowded ballroom. Isabella turned to her husband. It's late, she said. And it's been a very long day. It has. Alessandro's eyes searched her face. Are you ready to go home? Home. The word carried different weight now. Yes, Isabella said. I'm ready to go home. The drive back to the estate was quiet, but not the heavy silence of their journey a week ago. This was a comfortable quiet. A shared quiet. When they arrived, the house was dark except for the lights in the main entrance. The staff had been dismissed for the night. They were alone. Alessandro walked beside Isabella up the grand staircase, his hand still intertwined with hers. At the landing, they paused. The hallway branched in two directions, one leading to Isabella's suite, the other to the wing Alessandro had occupied alone for 2 years. He looked at her. She looked at him. I don't want to go back to sleeping alone, Alessandro said quietly. But I'll wait. However long you need. I'll wait. Isabella studied his face. The ice that had defined him for so long was gone. In its place was something vulnerable, something real, something she had waited 12 years to see. Come with me, she said. She led him not to her suite, but to the master bedroom they had shared in the early days of their marriage. The room that had stood empty for years. The room where they had once dreamed of building a life together. She opened the door. Inside, moonlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating familiar furniture covered in dust cloths. This is where we started, Isabella said. Maybe this is where we should start again. Alessandro's breath caught. Are you sure?
No.
Her honesty surprised even herself. I'm not sure about anything. I'm scared.
I'm
hopeful. I'm still angry about things that haven't been fully addressed. She turned to face him. But I'm also tired of being alone. And I think I'm ready to try not being alone. With you. Alessandro moved toward her. Slowly, carefully, as if approaching something precious that might break. He stopped when they were barely a breath apart. I love you, he said. Not because you saved my alliances. Not because you're brilliant and capable and more powerful than I ever understood. I love you because you're Isabella. Because you're kind and patient, and you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. Because you've given me chance after chance when anyone else would have walked away. He reached up and cupped her face in his hands. I love you, he repeated. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that again. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. She had waited so long. So long. I love you too, she whispered. Even when I wanted to hate you. Even when you made it so hard. I never stopped loving you. Alessandro bent his head and kissed her. Not the tentative kiss of the night before. This was different. This was a claiming, a promise, a beginning. Later, much later, they lay together in the moonlit darkness. Isabella's head rested on Alessandro's chest, his arm wrapped around her. The dust cloths had been pulled away. The room had been reclaimed. Their marriage had been reborn. What happens now? Isabella murmured. Alessandro's fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder. Now we figure out who we are, he said.
Together.
Not the people we were pretending to be. The people we actually are. That might take a while. We have time. His arm tightened around her. We have the rest of our lives. Isabella smiled against his chest. The families will be watching. After today, after everything that happened, they'll be paying attention to every move we make. Let them watch. Alessandro's voice carried a new warmth. Let them see what a real partnership looks like. Maybe they'll learn something. You're different, Isabella said softly. Already. I can feel it. I hope so. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I want to be different. For you. For us. For yourself. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he admitted. For myself, too. I was so afraid, Isabella. For so long. Afraid of being vulnerable. Afraid of needing someone. Afraid that if I let myself feel, I would be destroyed. He paused. I didn't realize that by refusing to feel, I was destroying myself anyway. just more slowly. Isabella lifted her head to look at him. In the moonlight, his steel-gray eyes were soft, open, unguarded. "I see you," she said. "The real you. I've always seen you. I was just waiting for you to see yourself. And now we see each other." She settled back against his chest. "Now we move forward, together." Outside, the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky. A new day was coming, a new beginning. And for the first time in 12 years, both Alessandro and Isabella Valeni were exactly where they belonged, in each other's arms. 6 months passed. The changes in the Valeni household were visible to everyone who cared to look. Alessandro and Isabella moved through their world differently now, truly as partners, making decisions together, presenting a unified front to allies and enemies alike. The vow renewal ceremony had become legendary among the families. The story of Isabella's confrontation with Bellecourt was told and retold, growing more dramatic with each telling. And the image of Alessandro Valeni, once feared for his coldness, now admired for his devotion, had transformed entirely. But more important than the public perception was the private reality. Morning breakfasts that stretched into hours of conversation. Evening walks through the garden where Alessandro actually listened instead of merely appearing to. Late-night discussions about everything from philosophy to family history to the future they were finally building together. And throughout it all, through the small moments and the large, through the challenges that inevitably arose and the victories they celebrated, Alessandro never forgot his promise. He showed her, every day, in 1,000 small ways, that she was seen, that she was valued, that she was irreplaceable. On the anniversary of their vow renewal, the families gathered once again at the Palazzo Nero. This time, there were no empty chairs, no conspicuous absences, no underlying tension. The Black Rose Gala had been transformed from a political obligation into a genuine celebration. Alessandro and Isabella entered together, his hand properly positioned at the small of her back, but now the gesture carried tenderness rather than possession. She wore deep red tonight, a deliberate echo of the burgundy dress she hadn't worn a year ago. He wore black, as always, but with a single red rose pinned to his lapel. Matching her, honoring her, the room rose to greet them. Not because protocol demanded it, because respect did. Don Caruso was the first to approach. "A year ago," the old man said, his weathered face creased with genuine warmth, "I stood in this very room and asked where your wife was. Do you remember what I told you that night?" Alessandro nodded. "You said I had been given a gift, a second chance. And have you used it wisely?" Alessandro turned to look at Isabella. She stood beside him, radiant in red, her hazel eyes reflecting the chandelier light. The woman who had saved his empire. The woman who had saved his soul. "I have," he said. "Or, at least, I've tried to. I'm still learning." "Good." Caruso nodded approvingly. "The day you stop learning is the day you start failing. Remember that." He walked away, leaving them alone amid the glittering crowd. Isabella slipped her hand into Alessandro's. "Nervous?" she asked.
No.
He squeezed her fingers. "I have you. What is there to be nervous about? Flatterer. Truth-teller." He lifted her hand and kissed it. "Shall we face the masses, partner?" Isabella smiled. "Together," she said. "Always." And together, they walked into their future. Later that evening, after the speeches had been made and the deals concluded and the families had departed satisfied, Alessandro and Isabella stood alone on the palazzo's balcony. The city of Rome spread before them, lights twinkling against the velvet darkness. "Do you remember," Alessandro said, "when I told you I didn't deserve you?" Isabella leaned against the railing, looking out at the city. "Which time?" "All of them." He moved to stand beside her. "But specifically, the night before our vow renewal. When I said I would spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you. I remember. I meant it." He turned to face her. "And I still mean it. I know I've made progress. I know things are better. But I also know there are still ways I fail you that I don't even see. Things I do without thinking that hurt you." "Alessandro, let me finish." He took both her hands in his. I want you to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll tell me. When I hurt you. When I fail you. When I slip back into old patterns. His steel-gray eyes were intense. Promise me you won't suffer in silence the way you did for 12 years. Promise me you'll call me out, even when it's uncomfortable, even when I don't want to hear it. Isabella studied his face. The man before her bore little resemblance to the cold, distant husband she had endured for so long. But he was right. Old patterns had a way of reasserting themselves. Vigilance was necessary. Communication was essential. I promise, she said. But I need you to promise something too. Anything. Promise me you'll listen. Really listen. When I tell you something is wrong, promise you won't dismiss it or minimize it or explain it away. She held his gaze. Promise me you'll believe me when I tell you what I'm feeling, even if you don't understand it. I promise. And promise me, she paused, searching for the right words. Promise me that you'll forgive yourself eventually, for the years we lost, for the mistakes you made. I see you carrying that guilt, Alessandro. I see it weighing on you. And while I'm grateful that you understand what you did wrong, I don't want you to drown in it. His eyes glistened. I'm not sure I know how to forgive myself. Then we'll figure it out together. She reached up and touched his face. The same way we're figuring out everything else. Together. Alessandro leaned into her touch. How did I get so lucky, he murmured. After everything I did. How do I deserve you? You don't. Her smile softened the words. And I don't deserve you either. That's not how love works. It's not about deserving. It's about choosing. She rose on her toes and kissed him softly. I choose you, Alessandro. I will always choose you. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. And I choose you, he whispered against her hair. Today, tomorrow, forever. They stood there, wrapped in each other, as the city lights glittered below them. Two people who had almost lost everything. Two people who had found their way back to each other. Two people who had learned, finally, what it meant to be truly seen. The story of Alessandro and Isabella Valenti became legend among the families. Not because of his power or her beauty, but because of what they represented. Proof that people could change. Proof that mistakes could be redeemed. Proof that even the coldest heart could learn to love, if only it was brave enough to try. In the years that followed, they faced new challenges and celebrated new victories. They built an empire stronger than Alessandro's father had ever imagined, not through fear, but through the respect Isabella had earned over decades. They raised children who learned from their parents' mistakes as much as their successes. They grew old together, their partnership deepening with each passing year. And whenever anyone asked them the secret of their success, their power, their longevity, their legendary unity, they gave the same answer. We almost lost each other once, Alessandro would say. We decided never to let it happen again, Isabella would add. And then they would look at each other with the kind of love that defies explanation. The kind that survives betrayal and blossoms in forgiveness. The kind that was worth waiting 12 years to find. The kind that lasted forever. The end.